बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया नुसरत साहब। जनाब जनरल एहसान साहब जो हमारे चीफ गेस्ट हैं आज के, और जो इस सेमिनार को एक ख़ास अहमियत देते हैं, क्योंकि इनका तजर्बा उस नौइयत का है कि जिन मौजू पे हम बात करेंगे उस पर इन्होंने DGISI की हैसियत से, DGMI की हैसियत से और चेयरमैन जॉइंट चीफ स्टाफ की हैसियत से सब पे इनकी कड़ी नज़र रही है, और इनका तजर्बा बहुत सालों का जो है वो अगर आपके साथ शेयर करेंगे तो मुझे यकीन है कि आप सब इससे बहुत फ़ायदा उठा सकेंगे। Now I'm sorry, I'm going to revert to the language, as Nusrat said that this is a bilingual session, so I will speak in English. I will answer if there are questions. I don't think we're going to have very much time for questions because you've got such a good collection of brilliant speakers that I'm not sure that there will be time for questions, for very lengthy session of questions. And I'm sure that you will also find that the subject that we've chosen is a subject on which you will find a lot of repetition. There will be repetition because most of the panelists here are people who are experts in recognizing what our security challenges are. Security challenges both internal and external, and our economic challenges both internal and external. So you might find that a lot of things are repeated. And I therefore thought that I would take this opportunity to sort of pinpoint what are the issues, give my views briefly, and then hope that these will be further elaborated upon in the discussions and in the presentations made by my fellow panelists. Let me start with the security challenges, both internal and external. I think perhaps there is an interlinkage between the internal and the external. Today, when I think in terms of our external security challenges, three things stand out. Our relations with Afghanistan and the advancement of reconciliation in Afghanistan. Second, the impact that this has on the relationship with the United States and our reading or our interpretation of what the Americans intend doing further, both in Afghanistan and in the region. And thirdly, our relations with India, from which also flows the fact that, and I will come to the relationship with China a little later because I wish to speak about that in the context of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, but all these are also somewhat interlinked questions. They're interlinked among themselves, but they are also interlinked with our internal situation. Because the internal challenge, the security challenge that we face is a continuing one. It is one of extremism and terrorism, and the extent to which we have succeeded in curbing it is an important question that has to be addressed. And how should we continue to address it is another element. I think... So my point about how we should address it is that internally we have reached a point, I hope, we've reached a point where we can say that our battle against terrorism is succeeding. But how should it be fought further? And I would like to venture the view that perhaps now the time has come when more and more of this operation must be construed as a police operation, as a civil matter, in which the usual civil law enforcing agencies plus the paramilitary forces under the control of the Interior Ministry must start taking more responsibility for this. Where with the ministries, other ministries, there has to be a focus on reconstruction. Today we see, and we have seen with some concern, the degree to which there is unrest because the degree of rehabilitation that is required has not taken place in the areas most badly affected by terrorism in the past. By the same thing, we must recognize that this internal problem has the external dimension, that if the Afghanistan crisis continues, the unrest and turbulence, the diminishing unrest and turbulence in the areas affected in Pakistan by terrorism, by extremism, will again rise to a new pitch if the Afghanistan situation is not settled. Therefore, one of the imperatives for Pakistan is going to be to look for how reconciliation could be promoted, how an Afghan-led, Afghan-owned reconciliation comes out of the negotiations that the U.S. envoy, Mr. Zalmay Khalilzad, is having with the Taliban, and perhaps taking note of what happens in Moscow, what happened at the meetings that took place in Moscow, and having to draw a line as to whether this is helpful or harmful, and whether there may be the very grim prospect of a resurrection of the Northern Alliance and the civil war situation that existed between the Northern Alliance as it was then in 1996 and the Taliban. Will that be repeated in 2019? This is a situation that we must make every effort to try and avoid. That is another segment of the external security challenge with its implications for our internal security that we must look at. We have a problem in terms of the relationship with our neighbor, our close neighbor, close relationship with Iran. Where does that stand, and how does this fit into the picture that exists in the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, and the divisions within the Gulf Cooperation Council, the divisions which seem to suggest, or to make it more immediate, the ministerial meeting that is going to be held in Poland, and on which the focus would appear to be to see how the alliance that the Americans are seeking to build in the GCC and in the Arab countries against Iran, how that is going to come out. Now, of course, the ministerial has been reinterpreted or reassessed or talked about as something that is aimed at peace in the Middle East, though perhaps many people will stay with the view that the inclination in the beginning is the inclination that will prevail. For Pakistan, this is a difficult situation which is compounded by the apprehensions and suspicions raised by the visit of General Rahil Sharif, now the commander of the anti-terrorism or the counter-terrorism military alliance with headquarters in Riyadh, and what that has meant. I think that Pakistan has astutely handled the situation in the past and will continue to handle it in the future. Pakistan will not be drawn into any intra-Muslim quarrel, and that situation will prevail, whether it be a situation between Qatar and its erstwhile partners in the GCC, whether it be between the GCC countries and Iran, or whether it be the situation in Yemen. Pakistan will not be drawn. And I think that situation will continue to press home in terms of how we maintain our relationship. But on the other hand, we have a very great dependence on the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, including all of them. This is the principal source of remittances for Pakistan, and if there are now encouraging signs about remittances going up, much of this is happening because of the current flow of remittances from the GCC countries. So we have to play a very careful game based on something that has been acknowledged as being Pakistan's position over the last 70 years. No involvement beyond an involvement in trying to have a problem resolved peacefully in any quarrel between two Muslim countries. Let me move to the other neighbor, Iran. I must now also say that I found somewhat mystifying the fact that our inter-services gas company has talked about the fact that they have asked the Iranians to tell them their view of whether American sanctions will apply to the gas pipeline onshore gas pipeline that we have been discussing with Iran now for the last 20 years, and that they are still awaiting a reply. And yet, on the other hand, I saw a report that they wish to give a contract or sign a memorandum with the Russian Gazprom that they will build an offshore pipeline from Iran to Pakistan. I don't understand how you can reconcile these two. And this brings me to perhaps the question that I really want to address. Today we are listed as 117th in the list of corrupt countries. Bangladesh is listed at 141st, which means it is at least 34 places ahead of us in the degree of corruption. Bangladesh's rate of growth today is 7%. Its foreign exchange reserves are 30 billion plus. Its economic trajectory appears to be on the upward swing. Much of it is due to the fact that they have greater market access and greater freedom for garment making than we do. But they also have control on their population. They also have now a better educational level. They have better health indices, and in any way are better. Now, we say that much of our problem arises from the fact that there is corruption. Of course there is corruption. What I want to emphasize is that we are, according to people who study this, less corrupt than Bangladesh. So what is our problem? Our problem is governance. And this is the principal problem that Pakistan has to face. If our civil service is not restored, if we do not get back the quality of the bureaucrat which kept this country alive from 1947 to 51, 52, and then allowed it to progress dynamically during a decade that we associate with President Ayub, and which had many ups and downs, and in which income inequality was talked about. But it was a period of progress. We were progressing then at 6.5%, while we could talk about the Hindu rate of growth being 3%. Our rupee, 100 Pakistani rupees fetched 130 Indian rupees. Today, it's now 50 Indian rupees for 100 Pakistani rupees. Where has this come from? I think we come back to this, that you have to restore your governance, and restoring the governance means taking measures for it. I have a formula, but better than my formula is perhaps a formula of Dr. Ishrat Hussain, who has studied this problem in great detail and who has laid out in numerous plans what exactly are the steps that need to be taken. My own version is rather simpler. My version is that in our civil service, you can talk about at least 30% of the people having the level of competence that is required. Give them the lead and think of what has happened in the past as having been in the past. Do not have NAB involved in minor cases of corruption, or minor or major cases of corruption, which should be handled by the department, which should be handled by the anti-corruption elements that you have in every institution. This is the way to resolve them, and let NAB focus only on mega corruption projects, and slowly but surely rebuild. You have an advantage. Your Prime Minister has a reputation for incorruptibility which has not been called into question. He has some advisors whose again reputation is beyond reproach. These are the people around whom the rebuilding of the civil service can take place. But we must recognize that it is an urgent problem, and that the problem must be addressed with that degree of urgency. Let me come now to our other neighbors. We have in India, our government has let it be known that they do not expect any forward movement until the elections are completed, and either Prime Minister Modi returns to power, or the Congress party, which is rejuvenating itself, becomes a rival force, not by itself, but in alliance with other parties. My own feeling is that today Kashmir remains the major problem between Pakistan and India. The Kashmiri people have now made it known by their struggle, by their relentless, the youth appearing in the streets, taking bullets, taking injuries to their eyes and other limbs, that they will continue their struggle. Their struggle is that of youth. It is not going to stop. The Kashmiri must therefore be a principal part of any search for a solution. But in the meanwhile, we must keep an eye, as the Kashmiri people do, on the fact that Article 3870 of the Indian Constitution, in which the rights of the Kashmiris are protected in small measure, and particularly Article 35 of the Kashmiri Constitution, which prohibits the sale of any Kashmiri land to a non-Kashmiri, that these continue to remain in force. These are the elements that we will have to watch. But I think we also have to see that for Prime Minister Modi, so far, Hindutva, or the extreme view of the Hindu religion and its dominance, has played a part in his success. Is this going to continue to be the base for his success? Today on the Kumbh Mela, he has spent about $300 million in order to ensure that the Hindu vote is for him. But my own, and this is again my reading, not a reading that is necessarily shared, is that he will probably return to power, but with a reduced majority. And when he returns to power with a reduced majority, he will perhaps recognize that the extremist view that he has propounded is not a view that will hold India together, but will polarize Indian society. And perhaps then one consequence of this would be the willingness to not use Hindutva and not use the anti-Pakistan card for the future. It's a hope. It's not a realizable hope. But it is important because one of the things that we hope for from the China-Pakistan economic corridor, which is what I want to talk about next, is that it must have connectivity. That Pakistan and Afghanistan must be the bridge between South Asia and Central Asia. It must be the bridge across which Turkmenistan gas, Tajik and Kyrgyz electricity come to Pakistan or go on further, as the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India gas pipeline is planned to do, and thereby create that measure of connectivity, which is the economic future that we are looking for. We must remember that China-Pakistan economic corridor calls for Gwadar to have a capacity of 9 million tons. With each 9 million tons, I calculated, and somebody can correct me on this, this means more than 30,000 20-foot containers. That is a lot of traffic. It is not the amount of traffic that you can expect from Kashgar alone. It is the traffic that will have to be generated from the region as a whole. So we are to use Gwadar to its fullest capacity. It must be able to draw upon the traffic that is generated throughout the region. And this, I think, is another lesson that Prime Minister Imran Khan is willing to push for, that we have to look to our economic well-being. We have to look to how to improve the economic welfare of the people of Pakistan. So that is, I think, let me, I think I've taken far too much time already, but let me stop here, and perhaps my colleagues at this table will enlarge on these points. But let me re-emphasize that our principal problem is governance. That is the first thing that we must seek to restore. And perhaps we must also restore, not in the government alone, but in the people of Pakistan. a sense that the rule of law should prevail. You're sitting in Karachi, you're sitting on Shara Faisal. We had for 3 days success in the special sidewalk that had been created for the passage that had been created for motorcyclists. 3 days. I go across Shara Faisal every day. It lasted for exactly 3 days. Then our people said, "Kya karna hai yaar? Jahan chalo chalo. Kaun rokta hai?" You had a helmet campaign for motorcyclists. 3 days again, and it collapsed. Now I travel this and I see that there are still people sitting there trying to sell helmets. There are no buyers because there's no enforcement of law. And we have become used to the idea, we as a people have become used to the idea that sab chalta hai. Until that changes, until we believe that the enforcement of law is the duty of the law enforcing officers, but it is also the duty of the citizen, who when he goes to Dubai is one of the most obedient, one of the most disciplined people going, and yet as soon as he comes home, he thinks that, I mean, this is not what freedom means, but this is how we seem to interpret our freedom, that we can do what we please, we do not have to follow any rules. So let me leave you with this, that there is a duty that has to be done by improving governance and improving the instruments of governance, but we also have a duty as a people to ensure that we do what is required to help the law enforcing agencies by not flouting but obeying the law. Thank you. I'll stop here.